It's currently midnight and I usually never film this late, but I just got back from the Joe Hisaishi concert. Basically the perfect time to film this video because I'm talking about this book here, On Grief and Studio Ghibli. I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about like Studio Ghibli in general, my relationship with Studio Ghibli, my thoughts on Studio Ghibli, not just the book, because it is quite a short book and I think I can summarize it pretty well for you. By the way, first of all, the concert itself, each part of it was so beautiful. He started off playing the score from Nausicaa and he did almost all his work. I think Porco Rosso, obviously Totoro, Princess Mononoke was absolutely gorgeous, Howl's Moving Castle, with The Wind Rises, obviously my favorite. So it was really beautiful to see all of that come to life, and even like that whole atmosphere of being in this space surrounded by people who have such a deep appreciation for music. And Studio Ghibli was also really nice. And then we came home, we're having McDonald's, and I'm probably like at the end of the day now looking pretty greasy, covered in burger sauce, but just ignore and let's talk about the book itself. I thought about this for a while, but for the longest time I couldn't remember like what was my first kind of interaction with Studio Ghibli, and I'm pretty sure that the first movie I ever watched was La Puta, Castle in the Sky. Immediately I was so drawn to Studio Ghibli and like Hayao Miyazaki's work. Obviously, if you know my kind of fascination with Japanese literature and the kind of Japanese storytelling, I think it makes perfect sense why I found it so intriguing and why I like Ghibli, because I think it has a very similar style. Like the pacing is so beautiful and it really takes the time to say very, I guess, like simple stories, or rather very complex stories in a very simple way. So definitely love it. I mean, every single one from Up on Poppy Hill, Only Yesterday are some of my favorite ones, but my absolute favorite ones are probably The Wind Rises and Ocean Waves. Unfortunately, those two movies are not a part of this book, but I saw this being recommended to me somewhere and it was just an instant purchase. Usually I'm quite skeptical in buying anything related to Studio Ghibli or like stuff that I like, because I feel like a lot of the times stuff that I've seen about Studio Ghibli has been like a very obvious cash grab, but something about this didn't feel like that, and I'm glad that I was right, because this honestly feels like one of the most genuine kind of reviews, or rather like musings on Miyazaki's work. I like to believe that I think about things very deeply and I analyze things quite a lot, but a lot of the times I do watch things and I don't overthink it, you know, I just kind of let it go. But I think I have to give Karl some credit here, because he really made me think about certain aspects of Studio Ghibli or certain aspects of the movies that I really hadn't considered before. And I think that was like, I was really shocked, because I was like, damn, I really didn't think about that. And that's definitely the impression I want to have from reading books and reading kind of consuming any kind of media or literature. I just want to feel like I would have never come to that conclusion on my own. I'm really happy that someone has introduced a completely different perspective. Another thing I really liked about this author is that he wasn't really forceful about his thoughts and our opinions. He definitely stated everything as in like, these are just my understanding or my interpretation of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, you know. It's all theories at the end of the day, what we can and cannot say, and I don't think one person's interpretation should be taken as like gospel. So I really appreciate that he's kept a really like open conversation about the entire book. Before I sat down to film, I did actually think about this for a while, about like what about Studio Ghibli really appeals to me. And I feel like different people have different answers to this question. I've heard a lot of people say that they love the fact that it has like female protagonists, and like especially children, like, you know, young female protagonists. It's just so beautiful, and the way they're able to tell stories through the lens of like a younger character but still make it so deep. And then I thought about how like the ones I like Wind Rises or Ocean Waves, they're not necessarily female or like young children who are protagonists, which then made me go back to the question like, what about it do I really like? And I don't think there is like a straightforward answer to this. I think in general there is a deep sense of nostalgia, but also what I said about being able to communicate a story without being like very explicit about it. and at the same time make it entertaining. Something that has so many layers to it is just so beautiful. So I think a lot of the times when I read books, my imagination is like wild, and probably the book is like less tamed. Whereas with Studio Ghibli, I feel like my imagination would have never been there. I feel like, you know, even reading a book would have never put these vivid images in my mind. So the imagery in combination with the storytelling is just a perfect combination. If I had to pick one book that made the absolute like biggest impression, it would probably be The Wind Rises. And from the very like top level, it might seem like the book is about World War II and airplanes, and something that I really didn't think very deeply about till I watched this book. But once I watched it, I just felt this kind of like lightness to myself after I finished the movie. And it's a very sad movie, if anything, and the whole movie is just about letting yourself like really realize what is happening in your life and take control of it and just get through that whole messaging. Like, it's such a simple thing that we must learn to live with everything else that is a part of life, you know. Learn to live with grief, learn to live with sadness, learn to live with constant kind of chipping away at things that feel impossible. And I don't think any other movie made me feel about it so deeply. And that kind of brings me perfectly to the book, because the book is titled On Grief. And I think the author has really picked a really interesting aspect of the Ghibli movies to talk about in this book, because he talks about how through these different stories, what Miyazaki is really doing is introducing how, to a certain level, you don't have to lie to children. You don't have to make things all flowery, and you don't have to put these facades on top of things. In fact, children are really good at learning, absorbing, and adapting to things. So if we introduce them to certain things at a really young age, it becomes much easier as they grow up to really understand those things in life and those concepts and changes in their life. And if I think about story like Chihiro or Kiki, they very much are thrown, you know, taken from their childhood and thrown into these situations where they have to very quickly grow up and learn to like give up on those things, you know, that innocence of childhood, and learn to accept the realities of growing up and learning to live alongside the god of death, of grief. And all of this is just so beautifully done. He definitely says that, you know, children don't need to be lied to. You don't have to sugarcoat things, but delivery is obviously the most important thing. And in this case, like, it's done with so much care and understanding of how it might come across to a child who's watching it versus an adult watching it. The few main pieces of work that the author talks about in this book are Spirited Away, Ponyo, Kiki's Delivery Service, and he also talked about Grave of Fireflies and Totoro. Grave of Fireflies is the only one that I haven't watched so far, because I'm scared that it's gonna break my heart into a million pieces. But the rest of them I have watched. I think I would say like 90% of the Ghibli movies. And the one that he begins talking with is Spirited Away and Chihiro, and how she gets taken away from the life as she knows it by her parents and moved to a new place, and she's kind of struggling to understand this change in her life. And at the very moment, she's taken from her actual life and thrown into the spirit world, where everything that she knew again has been totally snatched away from her. And she's also kind of thrown into the depths of basically labor, and like, you know, you have to work in order to get something, and those things are not some like concepts as children that we totally understand. In a way, she's like forced to get her shit together and get through it, but for seemingly no fault of her own. And I think this is also a thing that when we're children, most of the time things that happen to us, or bad things that happen to us, are not something that is even the result of a decision or something that we've done. Most of the time it's just fate and how things have worked out, or decisions of people around us. And that's why, especially for kids, I think this is such an interesting message to say, like, sometimes you just have to get through it and know that it's not your fault, but at the same time, the best you can do and the only thing you can do is just try and get through it. Most of us actually don't grow up that privileged and sheltered. Some of us are better at hiding it than others, but most of us go through really tough times during our childhood. And what the author says again and again is just about how if we're taught at a young age that grief is not something that we can just ignore and it'll go away, we have to learn to really embrace it and live with it. Only then we can stop it from taking control over like our entire life. Another really interesting thing that he brought up was No Face from Spirited Away, almost being like a metaphor for grief, how grief often has no solid form or face to it, but it's something that grows and grows, and a shadowy figure that finds the smallest cracks and slips through and feeds on you to get stronger. He also raises a really good point about how Studio Ghibli has this like many different stories and things weaved into each story. So for example, just because he talks about this particular topic in one movie doesn't mean he doesn't address it from a different angle in another. And I think this is also something that I didn't notice, and like going back and rewatching some of those or thinking about them, it's really true that the same concept of like being thrown into adulthood and being thrown into like this work environment could be very similar if what's happening to Chihiro versus Kiki, who, you know, seemingly comes from this witch world and she's so fascinated by the world, and the moment she starts working, then the magic disappears from her life, quite literally, and it takes her forever to get some of it back, because once that magic is lost, it's so hard to get it back. And these are just a couple of things that he touched on. Honestly, there's so much more in the book that I honestly thought that like for even Studio Ghibli fans or like not, was super fun to read. In general, these seem to be a new, I don't know if they're new actually, for me they're new, little paperbacks, quick reads. I would call them like almost one train journey, 2 train journey reads for me commuting into work. I'm definitely put a couple more of these links into my basket and I want to read them. But if you're a Studio Ghibli fan, 100% pick it up. If you're not, watch the movies, become a fan, and then pick it up. But that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And yes, super buzzed about the concert too. Really looking forward to continue with the Murakami series as well. If you don't know, if you're new to the channel, I'm doing a full series on all of Murakami's books, which I'll also link down below. But yeah, see you guys next time. Bye.